Sure. Let's do a brief review now. Meanwhile, you pick up the review.
So did we read? I know we read 36.
One chapter and a half.
36.
We read 36 and then half of 37, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh. So I'll do 36 and then someone else can. So 36 was about the work of the. How do you say that again?
Abolitionists.
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 Mm-hmm.
And it was talking a lot about slavery and how a lot of people were wanting to stop slavery and thought it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But some people wanted to, or disagreed.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a lot in this chapter about what people had said and stuff, like different stories that they had mentioned.
What the main character?
Was it William
No, that was
Wilberforce
the
or
guy it was like
what was it? Why am I forgetting?
Or there's John Wesley,
John Wesley.
right? John Wesley,
John Wesley.
Started the revival.
Yeah.
That spread around people, the common opinion change about slavery, right? So then there is a parliament member in British Parliament. What is his name? He's the one pushed the adoption of called the Emancipation Act, right? So
It's not Wilberforce, is it?
yeah, William Wilberforce, exactly.
Okay.
That's a person.
But is that who you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Which year the British passed a law?
wasn't it 18 18?
18, what year?
1818?
1833,
Oh,
right? 1833, so yeah, that's good. So from 1776, 1833, that's almost half century later, right? Less than half century later, things begin to change, right? So, but American lagging behind in this way, later on, the conflict, the problem began to be heightened in the time in the middle of the century, right? Leading to the Civil War. Am I making sense to you? So now, the history here turned to where slaves, British rule in Africa look like, am I right? So
Yeah.
the first part called the Zulu Kingdom. Anybody want to do a review on Zulu Kingdom? 37, first part called this chapter called the Troubled Africa. So the Zulu Kingdom. Lajian, do you have?
Actually, unfortunately, wasn't able to take much notes on it because I read
Okay.
most of it.
Okay. Well, Benji, do a review.
On the Zulu Kingdom?
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't remember too much of this one actually, and I didn't
Okay.
take notes either.
I can try.
No,
I
good,
can
good,
try.
good. You can try. Go ahead.
Okay, so Zulu. Oh, are you doing it?
It's okay. Go ahead, Esther. You do it. Why not you do it? Mhm.
I'm gonna have to like look at the names, like how to say them. But there was a king. There was a king.
Now, there was a
That's
king.
it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
That's too much.
So, yeah, this girl. Wait, am I on the right thing?
Yeah, then you obviously cannot do the review. Then Naomi do it. So Naomi laugh at over you. I'm the right thing.
Well, I don't know if I. What were you saying, Esther?
They're just this king.
Do we have enough books? We only have these books.
Esther. For
Yeah, I left
hers,
mine in my
Okay,
suitcase.
okay.
She will share one with me.
Mhm.
So I was talking about Africa and how the Europeans thought it was mysterious and they called it the Dark Continent because they didn't really know much about it.
Yeah.
And so I think some of them ventured there. I think it was some Englishmen,
Yep.
and it was in 1824.
Mm-hmm.
And they had asked the king, Shaka Zulus?
Zulus.
King of Zulus. So he asked if they could have an area to have a couple trading posts, and he didn't really think much of it and just allowed them to have enough land to do that, and they named it Durban.
Durban, that's where Prima came from.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Huh.
Yeah.
So then it started talking about the Shaka, his history.
Shigavigoko.
Yes,
Whatever.
that was his family, but
Yeah.
I think him and his mother were thrown out of that tribe
Yeah.
and
That's
kind
what I
of
was looking for.
sent in different areas, but he ended up defeating Metwata.
His ankle, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
and after he did that, I think he became a very. They called it the. I don't know how to say that. Mephican? Mephican?
What? Methicking
Methicking.
is a head?
Which means the crushing, so that's when they.
The crushing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was 18.
Try to conquer all other
Oh,
tribes,
that was-
right? So, yeah.
And then his mother died, and this made him very depressed. And
His
he
number
started to do-
name is Nandi, am I right?
Nandi, yep.
Mhm.
He started to do strange stuff, like he forbid anyone to drink milk because it
Oh.
reminded of his mother's love and care.
Yeah,
And he
he's-
killed every
He killed
cow
cows
that
and
he had.
calves.
No, he killed every cow.
It's pretty
Oh, yeah.
pretty bad, huh?
Yeah.
This guy.
And then it ended off by a couple people murdering him.
Mhm.
His stepbrothers.
Half brothers.
His
were-
half brothers.
Mm.
And then Dingane.
Dingani.
Dingani.
Dingani. Yeah. Well, every language has its unique way of pronunciation, right? So,
Yeah.
as you learn Chinese, it's a very awkward language for the English speaker, right? So, what about English to Chinese, like me?
So how do you say that?
Spanish is a word awkward, double awkward.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that.
There's a lot of tongue in there.
No wonder you're good at
that kind of
Wonderful.
yeah. Well, if you guys okay, let's start the next portion that we finish on the chapter today. Is that okay? So
Sure.
yeah. Okay, Benji, why don't you start reading the next session?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Dingane did not share Shaka's anger.
The title.
Oh, sorry.
That's good.
The Boers and the British.
There's a many historical books about the Boers War. Okay, there's 3 wars in succession. The British involved the final locals, the Boers War. Eventually, it spread over Australian. So I tried to read the book. I'm not able to chance to read it. So yeah, it's very interesting history. So.
When they're talking about Boers, they're talking about a people or
A people,
Okay, not
yeah,
like
so,
a syllable.
people, yeah, no.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a people. So. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay. Dingane did not share Shaka's anger or his desire to conquer as much of Africa as possible. But Dingane, am I saying that?
Dingani.
Dingane.
Sometimes the NE need pronunciation. They might like other languages, use wow. So
Okay.
don't ignore it. So.
Cool. But Dingane, too, was a warrior king. His turn to fight would come soon. Down at the bottom of South Africa, almost 1,000 miles away from the Zulu villages, where Dingane reigned,
Dingani reigned. Mm-hmm.
lay the European settlement called Cape Colony. 150 years before, the Dutch had built a trading post here, east, so that the Dutch ships heading around the African coast toward the east could stop and restock with food and water.
Mm-hmm.
The Dutch governor of the trading post built a fort, plowed himself a garden, and then planted an almond hedge around its edge. The almond hedge showed the edge of the Dutch land in Africa. As the years went on, more Dutch settlers came to Cape Colony. They were given farms behind the fort, close to the coast. They grew vegetables and pastured sheep and on the slopes of the African hills. These Dutch called themselves Boers. Dutch for farmers.
So Boars is Dutches, right? So descendant Dutches. So okay.
Their farms extended further and further into Africa.
Stand for what? Farmers. Okay. So
The nearby African tribes, the Khoi,
that's good one. Koya, 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 Koya.
Khoi,
Yeah, it's almost the same repetition of the same sound. It's Koya, Koya,
Koya,
Koya, Koya,
Koya.
Goyu, Goyu. Yeah. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the sun
Mm-hmm.
and the sun,
The same.
the same.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Tried to fight back when the Boers invaded their lands, but the Dutch had guns and horses, and the Africans were forced to retreat. Like other European colonists, the Boers used slaves to help run their farms.
Mm-hmm.
The sheep needed plenty of feedings. Sorry. Watering, shearing, and herding. The cows needed to be milked and pastured. Butter and wool had to be carried down into the Cape
You don't want to
colony.
look at this?
Hmm?
You don't want to look at my text?
Oh no, it's fine. I'm just.
Okay.
I'll do both. I'm just
Okay.
processing, listening.
The British had always wanted to own Cape Colony. After years of skirmishing
Skirmishing.
with the Dutch, occupying Cape Colony, giving it back, and then taking it again. The British finally claimed the colony for good in 1820. English settlers began to arrive, and an English governor now ruled over the colony. The Boers hated British rule, and they weren't fond of the English colonists who were settling down nearby.
Mm-hmm.
But when Britain declared slavery illegal in all of its islands and colonies, there was the last straw. The Dutch didn't think that they could manage without their slaves. Between 1835 and 1843, 10,000 Boers left Cape Colony.
That's a long fight, am I?
Mhm.
80 years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They put their furniture, their goods, their families, and their slaves into wagons pulled by oxen and set off into the unknown depths of Africa, looking for another place to settle down. This journey was called the Great Trek of the Boers. It was a hard and
Perilous. Perilous means dangerous, okay? So suffer a lot of loss and hardships. Mm-hmm.
perilous trip.
Mm-hmm.
But the Boers had been toughened by the life on their sheep farms. The British writer Sir Arthur
Conan Doyle.
Doyle,
Mm-hmm.
who intended
He wrote the first historical record called the Boer War, okay? So, go ahead.
who invented Sherlock Holmes, lived in the days when the Boers were settling South Africa.
Settling.
Settling,
Mhm.
sorry. He called these Boers the most rugged and
Unconquerable.
unconquerable
Unconqueror.
people on earth. To a community of Dutchmen, he wrote, who defended themselves for 50 years against all the power of Spain. Intermix with them a strain of those inflexible French. Train them for 7 generations in constant warfare against savage men and furious beasts.
Ferocious.
Ferocious.
Ferocious, sorry.
Okay, it's okay.
In circumstances under which no weakling could survive. Place them so that they acquire exceptional skill with weapons and horsemanship.
Mm-hmm.
Combine all these qualities in one individual and you have the modern Boer. Napoleon and all his veterans have never treated us so roughly as those hard-bitten farmers.
Didn't know the fight. That was it.
The hard-bitten Boers traveled into Africa, the wasteland left by Shaka soldiers.
Through the wasteland.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Deganis.
When they reached
When they reached Deganis territory, they were pleased with what they saw. This could be their new homeland. Degani didn't want them there on the edge of
I think the Dingani.
Dingani?
God. Yeah.
Dingani.
Dingani.
Dingani didn't want them there on the edge of his kingdom. But he was very wary.
Wary means alerted. alarmed by it, or be concerned, over concerned by it. So.
Worry of their horses and guns. Worry.
Mm.
The Boers settled down, unpacked their wagons, and started to build new farms. A small party of them struck out toward the village where Degani lived, hoping to make friends with the Zulu. Degani ordered them all put to death. This was a mistake. The Boers gathered themselves together for the attack, but they didn't rely on their guns alone. Boer leaders found out that one of Degani's half-brothers,
Mpandi. The Guinea, Mpandi, might be the mean wa for them. So when you see yi there, just yi, so yi. So. Mpandi. Mpandi.
Hoped to be king. They promised Mapandi that they would make him king of the Zulu if he would fight on their side.
Yeah, guys found the African song to listen to their voices, beautiful voices. Okay, so Uncle Baba, yeah. So that, yeah, beautiful songs. This is such a beautiful voice. So, go ahead.
With Mapandi's help, the Boers fought several bloody battles with the Zulu. The most famous took place on the banks of the Nakomi River.
There you go. You got it.
Later, the Boers claimed that the blood of the fallen Zulu warriors turned the river red.
Wow.
The battle became known as the Battle of the Blood River.
Wow. It's terrible. A lot of people died, huh?
This defeat settled Degani's fate. He fled from the Boers and disappeared into the heart of Africa. The Zulu hostility was broken. The Boers settled down near Durban, where the two English merchants had established their trading post. They called their new home Natal. 4 years later, the British claimed Natal from the Boers.
The British chasing. They have a war those days. They will have a war from the sea called the naval power, right? So chase all the Dutch ships that were took over the trading route basically. So they have a war with Dutch. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
The Boers traveled back toward the center of the continent. When their journeys were over, they had established two more kingdoms in Africa: the Orange Free State and the Transvaal Republic.
Transvaal Republic. That's a very interesting word. Okay, so you go later on. You will know they have their own languages developed as well. Transvaal. I had no idea. Wow is actually, I think it's a river somewhere. So yeah.
South Africa was slowly becoming a land filled with white settlers and their slaves.
That's where South Africa started. Okay, so until the 70s, last century, the nation become more free. Before that, they still have a segregation stuff going on. So, okay, let's look at the Trail of Tears. So, chapter 38, American tragedies. History is all tragedies, huh? Not too much happy stuff happening. The Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears where we on the end of the Trail of Tears is through Oregon, right? So, yeah, let's look at it. Look at the map. Can you find Sauk Fox?
Yes, at the top.
Okay, share the map with Esther. Okay. Let's see, find the Ohio River. Do you see Ohio River? Do you see Virginia?
Yep.
So obviously a lot of people from the south, from the east moved to the west, am I right? So Oklahoma, do you see Oklahoma? You see Turkey, the tribe, okay? Indian tribe. Chickasaw, Choctaw, that's two tribes there, right? So, and Simoneles, Florida. That's Florida, Georgia, Virginia, Ohio. Okay, go from there.
Looks like they all landed in Oklahoma.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, okay, Naomi, read on.
The Trail of Tears. When the Boers settled in southern African plains, they drove away the native tribes who lived there. But over in the United States, the American government had a different way of doing things. If American settlers wanted to build their houses on land where Native American tribes lived, they were supposed to pay for the land and sign a treaty explaining the Native Americans had agreed to sell it. Often, the Native Americans weren't given much choice, and they were hardly ever paid enough money for their land. White settlers bought entire forests and farms with handfuls of cheap jewelry and a few pounds of tobacco.
Kidding me?
But at least the settler who had handed over the jewelry had to admit that the Native American tribe had owned the land first. By 1830, more and more Americans wanted to buy land from the Native Americans who lived in the Ohio Valley and the Southeast states. The United States was growing. Settlers coming from Europe, called immigrants, didn't want to go all the way out to the empty western lands of the Louisiana Purchase, where there were no roads or stores or doctors. They wanted to settle near cities and rivers. But the Native American tribes who lived on valuable land in the Southwest and Midwest were too slow to hand over those lands over. Many tribes refused to sell any of their land at all. So, the President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, signed a law called the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act said that the President could now take Native American land without asking for it or paying for it, as long as he gave the Native Americans who lived there an equal amount of land in unsettled prairies of the West. The Indian Removal Act seemed like a good idea to Congress and President Jackson. For over 100 years, whites and Native Americans had quarreled, fought, and killed each other. Now white settlers could live near each other, and Native Americans could have their own part of the country further away. But the Native American tribes, the Indian Removal Act, meant that they would lose their homes without any way of getting them back. Many Native Americans had begun to follow white customs. For years, they had lived in log houses, growing fruit trees and planting gardens. Their children went to schools run by white missionaries. Many Native Americans wore European clothes and had taken English names. In the Southwest, 5 Indian tribes, the Chickasaw, I don't know how to say these. Seminole, Cherokee, and Creek had been nicknamed the 5 civilized tribes because so many of them lived just as white settlers. Cherokee Indians had their own towns with stores and churches. They published a newspaper written in both Cherokee and
Have you guys been to a heartland of Indian tribes? How experience? One time we went there, drive through.
Would
Not-
it be in California or?
Not particular visit, just wrong into it, you know.
Oh,
So
right.
yeah,
No, I don't think we
yeah,
have.
pretty beat down their town.
Have you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where
that's
were
what
you?
I'm talking about. I don't quite remember.
Yeah.
I thought there was some
Yeah.
Indian territory around here.
Here,
Yeah,
yeah,
there
but
is.
they well-to-do. There are some heartland is run down, you know, that
Right.
live in very terrible conditions. So,
Mhm.
anyway,
Cherokee Indians married white men and women and had children. Cherokee chiefs had adopted English names like John Ross and David Ben. Some Cherokee even owned plantations and kept African slaves to work the land.
wow, that's pretty interesting, huh?
Yeah, they were no longer the same people who had once roamed through the forest, moving their tents and carrying their belongings with them. But the Indian Removal Act decreed that all must go. Some of the 5 civilized tribes decided that they could not fight the United States government. The Chickasaw had loaded wagons preparing to leave. The Choctaw Indians began their journey west in the middle of the winter, the year after the act was passed. The government had promised to give them money to buy food, clothes during the journey,
During the journey. Mhm.
but the money never arrived.
Mhm.
The Choctaw ran out of blankets and coats. Many trudged towards their new homes barefoot in the snow.
Terrible.
The Creek Indians refused to go, so United States soldiers came to their homes, chained them together, and marched them toward the west. Hungry, cold, and loaded down with chains,
This is a shame.
3,500 Creek Indians died before
This
reaching
is
the new
this is a
Indian territory.
shameful page of American history, right? So, mhm.
The Cherokee and the Seminole tribes fought the hardest to keep their homes. Down in Florida, the Seminole picked up weapons and went to war.
I think called the Seminole.
Oh,
Seminole. I
Seminole?
don't know exactly.
Seminole?
Mhm.
It took the United States 7 years to defeat the Seminole and drive them out of Florida. The 7-year fight is known as the Second Seminole War.
Second Seminole War.
The Cherokee Indians tried fighting in a different way. They went to court to keep their homes. Judges heard them argue, and they deserved to live on their own farms. The court hearings dragged on for almost 8 years, but the governor of Georgia, where many Cherokee lived, didn't bother to wait for the judges' decisions. He divided up the Cherokee land and started to give it to the settlers who had won a lottery. Finally, 700 soldiers invaded the Cherokee lands. Invaded, sorry.
Mhm. Okay.
The Cherokee lands in Georgia, broke down the doors of Cherokee cabins and plantation houses, and chased the families who lived there outside. They were dragged from their houses, wrote a Baptist minister who had watched the invasion, allowed no time to take anything with them except the clothes they had on. It was the work of war in the time of peace. They were herded into camps. They were organized into bands for the long walk west. Meanwhile, white settlers and their neighbors looted their houses and farms, stealing their furniture, clothes, jewelry, books, dishes, and silverware.
Ah.
Even the soldiers who guarded them felt sick with anger over their actions. When I went into the army, one of them muttered, nobody told me I'd have to herd the people like cattle. I have seen men shot into pieces in war by the thousands. Another soldier wrote, but the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew.
Because it's not a war, right? This
Yeah.
abuse people. So
Yeah.
tragic.
In June of 1838, the Cherokee were marched toward the new Indian Territory in Oklahoma, 800 miles away.
800 miles away. That's a long walk.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
On this long, wretched journey, they marched through the drought, dying of thirst. Measles and other diseases began
Measles.
So I said measles.
You said measles. Measles.
Mm-hmm. It's not muscles.
Not muscles.
I like the muscles. Not measles.
Began to spread along the line.
Mm.
Almost every child and many grown persons were sick with the whooping cough, a soldier wrote, 2 weeks into the journey. They marched until winter came and snow howled down on them. At night, they camped in the open with nothing but blankets and campfires to keep them warm. No tents, no shelter.
You guys need to try once in
Yeah.
life to know suffering what it looks like, right?
Yeah, right.
Cold weather. Just one night.
Oof.
One
Just in a
night.
blanket.
Uh,
A white. Oh, sorry.
No,
No, go
it's
ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
No,
huh?
Nope.
no, it's not.
Yep.
Need to suffer in order to appreciate people's suffering, right?
Mm-hmm. I've been pretty cold before.
Oh,
Very cold.
okay. Yeah, I remember you jumping into the cold water and baptized. Stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that was cold too.
Yeah. I got to do mine in a hot tub.
Oh,
What?
easy.
At
Oh, I
night.
remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
remember
man, you're the most privileged
I know.
baptized
You got a little dirty.
area. I was getting cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At night, they camped in the open. Oh, wait, that's the wrong place. A white traveler passing by wrote, "We found the poor Cherokee Indians camped for the night by the roadside.
I
There was
remember-
several fall rain."
when this young lady been baptized, it was a frozen. I refused to get in the water with your
My
dad
dad, yeah.
because so cold.
It was in the lake.
It was so cold.
Yeah.
I remember I did here in
I have
the
a video of
seawater.
it.
It was silly water. So, but I was there, okay? I was with your dad in spirit and heart, am I? She was not quite happy. I didn't jump in the water.
She's doing pretty good.
She's doing pretty good
Yeah, I
now.
have a video of it.
Oh.
Now.
She was tough. So.
Yeah, we were all just standing outside the car with
Yeah, I would.
big coats, and we're like, oh.
Yeah, wrong time.
I think it was colder when glad you did it.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Carry on.
With the cold, wet ground,
That's
our
my
resting
fault,
place,
sorry.
after the fatigue of the day.
Mm.
We learned from the inhabitants on the road where the Indians passed that they buried 14 or 15 every stopping place.
Wow,
More weak and sick, Cherokee lay down to rest and never got up.
that's terrible.
Every morning, the Cherokee had to bury their own dead before marching on.
That's terrible, huh?
It took the Cherokee Nation a year to walk to Oklahoma.
Oh,
1 out of every 4 Cherokee died on that journey. The Cherokee called their journey
Nada to Sony, nada to Sony.
or the road where we cried.
Mm-hmm.
The day of this journey is called the Trail of Tears.
Let's do it again. Nuna Dao
Nuna Dao
Sony.
Tsuni.
Sony, yeah. 我到这叫 Sony，然后这叫 Sony。我到 to Sony。Mm-hmm. The road that we cried, the trail of tears. Okay, Esther, your turn. Don't do that. You can do that. Don't do that.
Really push that one, didn't you?
Anyways,
They're powerful.
yes.
Mine are very
You
loud.
guys have a lot of fun. Funny people have a lot of fun. That's good. Cheer me up. Okay, let's finish this chapter. Nat Turners. Nat Turners.
Turner's revolt.
Mm-hmm.
The Seminole Indians weren't the only Americans to rebel against their own countrymen. In the southern states of America, slaves worked from early until late on plantations. They had little food, no beds, no rest. They were whipped if they disobeyed their overseers.
Mm-hmm.
Their brothers, sisters, fathers, and mothers might be sold at any time and taken away, never to be seen again. Slaves in the American South had even less freedom than the Cherokee Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And the slaves on the island of St. Dominic revolted and killed their
Domingo,
masters.
man. Domingo.
Domingo.
Yeah, I don't say Ninga.
Yeah.
Domingo.
Revolted and killed their masters. Plantation owners in the South shuddered with fear. What if their own slaves got ideas about freedom and band together in rebellion? Planters who heard stories of Toussaint
Overture. Overture. That is, who is that? That's a liberator, am I right? In Haiti slaves, am I right? When independence. Remember that? So, go ahead.
and his victories checked their ammunition and kept their guns nearby. They watched their slaves carefully for any sign of rebellion. Every Sunday, they sent all their slaves to church, where a white preacher told them that God wanted all slaves to obey their masters without question.
That's a terrible abuse, am I right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But on Sunday evening, the slaves held their own church services. They sang songs about freedom and about God's judgment on cruel wrongdoers.
And that's where the gospel singer came from, okay? So, gospel songs came from this is slave songs. So.
Black ministers preached about a coming time of freedom when God would heal all the suffering of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
One of these black ministers was a slave named Nat Turner. For as long as he could remember, Nat Turner had worked on a Virginia plantation. but he also believed that he had been called by God to lead other slaves to freedom. His owner, Thomas More, let Nat Turner travel around to nearby villagers and preach to other slaves. Nat preached about the visions God had given him. I saw white spirits and black spirits engaged in battle, he preached. The blood flowed in streams. The great day of judgment was at hand. Thomas More thought that Nat was probably preaching about the end of the world, described in the book of Revelation. He didn't really listen at all that closely anyway. Why shouldn't slaves get together and worship? Religion would make them better slaves. They'd work harder and become more obedient. But Nat Turner's preaching was preparing the slaves to rise up and fight. Turner told them that he had heard a voice like thunder telling him to lead them into battle against the masters. On February of 1831, Nat Turner was mending a fence. The pale February sun shone down on his hands as he bent and twisted wire back into place. Nat squinted. It wasn't even near sunset, but the light seemed to be fading. He could barely see the wire.
What that means?
Eclipse.
Squinted. What means?
This.
Like,
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Wow.
what?
I don't know the word.
No, I wasn't laughing.
He told me what it was.
Come on, both sides. I can't stretch anymore.
He can stretch.
Can I?
He can. You definitely can. Go ahead.
He looked over his shoulder. The sun was fading from sight. A little at a time, a black circle moved across it. Soon, the whole farm was plunged into an eerie, greenish darkness. The moon had moved between the sun and the earth in a solar eclipse.
Solar eclipse. Eclipse.
But to Nat Turner, the eclipse was a sign. It was time to break free. Just like the slaves of
Haiti. Sorry, Haiti.
had done. Not long ago. Nat Turner could read a little bit. He knew about Toussaint and about Napoleon's armies. Now he would form his own army with
Lieutenants.
lieutenants and soldiers who would fight for the freedom of the slaves.
You're a good reader, Esther. So, as you grow, you squinting.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay.
Nat began to make his plans.
Don't poke me.
One by one, he told other slaves that he was forming an army. They met in secret in barns and cellars and out in the woods. The word spread to slaves on other plantations. They drew maps of all of the nearby houses and farms. Nat chose a slave nicknamed Hercules to be his second.
You know who Hercules is, right? Okay. Who
Yeah.
is this?
Greek god.
Greek goddess.
Hercules was huge. A giant among the slaves, taller than any white man nearby. Late on the night of Sunday, August 21st, 1831, Nat Turner met Hercules and 5 other slave leaders up pond. Later, Nat Turner's friends said that he made a speech. It is necessary that all the whites we meet die, he told his lieutenants. Ours is not a war for robbery. It is a struggle for freedom. Spare no one.
So you can know this man don't really hear God, right? So God never tell people to murder each other, right? So.
Then the 7 men picked up axes and knives and started out. First they went to the house where the family of Nat Turner's master lived. They killed everyone in the house. Then they walked in silence down the road to the next house and killed the farmer who lived there.
Remember, Thomas More, his master, is a good man, right? Trust him a lot, give him a lot of freedom to roaming around the preach. In a sense, a lot of respect and freedom. In a sense, I'm not saying this slavery is a good thing. Okay, I'm talking about those people don't necessarily deserve to die like that. Right? So.
And to the next house, and the next.
Mm.
The group of rebels grew. Now there were 15 armed men. They split into two groups, and attacked more houses. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Matt Turner's army had 40 men in it, all waving axes or guns. By noon, the whole county was in a panic. More than 50 whites lay dead. White men were yelling for their guns. Church bells rang. Riders thundered along the road, headed to find reinforcements. And in the middle of the noise, the slaves were cheering, dancing, and shouting for joy. Nat Turner, now called General Turner by his men, hoped to ride into the nearby town of Jerusalem, Virginia. There, he could establish headquarters and hold off white soldiers who might arrive. But his men had been drinking brandy all morning.
Seriously.
They were moving slower and slower. Before Turner could get them into the town, an armed band of slaveholders came riding up behind them. In the gunfire, Turner and his men fled into the woods and hid. Turner hoped that the next morning he would be able to reassemble his army, but his men were too scattered. One by one, they were captured. Nat Turner slipped deeper and deeper into the woods. Soon he had disappeared. Panic ruled in Virginia. Where was Nat Turner? Was he going to come back in the middle of the night with an even larger army? Whites, frightened and angry, began to kill their slaves. Over 120 black men and women who had nothing to do with Nat's attack were murdered. His captured men were convicted and hung.
What a tragedy.
For 2 months, Nat Turner remained free. He was living in the swamps nearby, finding foods in the woods, hoping that somehow he could again raise an army and fight for freedom. But a white farmer out hunting stumbled across Turner one morning as he crawled out of the ditch where he had been sleeping. Nat Turner was captured and taken back into the nearest town. Before he was tried, convicted, and executed, Turner told his side of the story to his lawyer, Thomas Gray. Gray wrote Turner's story down and published it as The Confessions of Nat Turner, leader of the late
Insurrection
in Southampton, Virginia. My mother, grandmother, and grandmother always told me I was intended for some great purpose, Nat Turner told Gray. The Lord has shown me things that had happened before my birth, knowing the influence I had obtained over the minds of fellow servants. And yet I now began to prepare them for my purpose by telling them something was about to happen that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me. I should arise and prepare myself and slay my enemies with their own weapons. 2 weeks later, Nat Turner was hanged. His rebellion hadn't freed the slaves. Instead, they were worse off than ever. Their owners were terrified of another revolt. Laws were passed keeping slaves from meeting together in groups of more than 3. Black ministers were told that they couldn't preach their
congregation.
Anyone who taught a slave to read or write would be punished by a year in jail. Free African Americans suffered too. They were not allowed to own guns or to meet together at night unless there were 3 white in prison at all times. All of these laws were meant to keep slaves from plotting rebellion. But many Americans realized that unless slavery were brought to an end, more bloodshed would happen. I foresee one of them more that this land must one day or another become a field of blood.
That is a terrible perspective, right? So, indeed, it turned out to be a war. And the Civil War cost a lot of life, right? So, Civil War had more people died than any other war American engaged. So, it was a terrible war. Well, obviously, you guys not that interested in history at all
Why not?
in the afternoons. So,